Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Want to start? Did you see what Greg Sankey said about the expanded college football playoff? Now, listen, to kind of contextualize this, okay? So obviously a lot has happened, not just in the last month that impacts the future of college football, but really the last year and change, really two and a half years dating back to when Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12 for the SEC. Most notably, it was almost exactly 1 year ago that the presidents pushed through a 12-team playoff. And why I'm talking about it today is because when the 12-team playoff was pushed through a year ago, the format that was eventually agreed upon I was actually okay with. 12 teams, and if you remember, 6 automatic bids. So in other words, the 6 highest ranked conference champions. So it's probably going to be the SEC champ, the Big Ten champ, and in most years, it'll be the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big 12 with one, what we call now, group of 5 team that's in. The problem is when that format was put into place, no one knew what was coming with the Pac-12. And since the Pac-12 has basically died, shout out Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, and Stanford. I guess they're still part of the Pac-4. Since the Pac-12 has basically died, the next logical question was, do we have to revamp how we look at the college football playoff? Going forward, once the 12-team playoff starts, by the time it starts next year, there's only going to be 4 power conference teams or 4 power conferences, and essentially all of the power in college football will basically be in the Big Ten and the SEC. Texas, Oklahoma going to the SEC, Washington, Oregon, USC, and UCLA going to the Big Ten. And so I bring it up because it's been a topic of conversation over the last couple weeks, and it was actually addressed earlier this week by Greg Sankey, the most powerful man in college sports. He was talking to Chris Lowe from ESPN and had some very interesting comments about the future of the expanded college football playoff. By the way, how about that? The future of it, it hasn't even started yet, and we're already changing it. But here is what Greg Sankey had to say about the future of the 12-team college football playoff to ESPN's Chris Lowe. He said, right now, you put it in bold letters that things are going to change, period. And we're all going to have to be prepared to deal with that change, period. He continued, the circumstances have changed, and we need to reconsider the format. I'm not convinced we need to reconsider the number of teams. And I've been clear that I would have been okay with an 8-team playoff with no conference champion access. That wasn't, if you will, politically tenable with the group. So as we continued to look at models, we came up with the 6-6 model. But again, the circumstances have changed in a meaningful way. And my inclination is we need to re-examine the current format. So that was Greg Sankey. By the way, shout out Greg Sankey. He always speaks in legalese. Forgive him. But basically what he was saying was exactly what I said. We don't need to we don't need to change the number. We don't need to change we don't need to change anything, but we do need to change the format of how we do the college football playoff. We started with the 6-6 model, but things have changed. We need to consider. Let me just say this. Listen, me and Greg Sankey have had our spats here on the Aaron Torres pod. Don't agree with everything that he has done here. But I will say, I do think on this one, he is right. Now, it really goes back, in my opinion, to when we first put in place that 12-team playoff a year ago. At the time, if you remember, so to be clear, I have never really been in favor of an expanded playoff beyond 4. My argument is always that it's hard enough to find 4 teams that are good enough to compete for a championship. Now we're going to have 12. It's going to be a fun event, but it's not going to be a championship event, and we aren't keeping teams out that are good enough to win the championship. And so I bring it up because I was never necessarily in favor of expanding the playoff, but once we got there, I will readily admit, I did like the 6-6 model, because what I said was, if we just go to a 12-team playoff where the 12 highest ranked teams get in, guess what's going to happen? We are going to have a situation where we have 4, 5, 6 SEC teams, 4, 5 Big Ten teams, and then maybe we get a team from here or a team from there. And so that was why I liked what Greg Sankey calls the 6-6 model. It allowed some of the conference champions out of the SEC and the Big Ten outside of those conferences to get into the playoff. And then also there's probably going to be at least one group of 5, maybe 2 in some years. The Pac-12 would be represented, the Big 12 would be represented, and their conference champ would get in. But at the same time, I'll also readily admit that stuff has changed. And with the change specifically with the Pac-12, I kind of agree with Sankey on this one. Listen, we can go to 12, and I don't know if it's the 12 highest ranked teams. I don't know whether it's 4 auto bids, 5 auto bids, maybe even so. At least a group of 5 team is considered. But we don't need 6 automatic bids going forward, because ultimately, while you do want it to be fair and equitable, you also want to see the best teams. And at this point, when you're adding 4 top 25 caliber teams to the Big Ten on top of Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State, and when you're adding 2 more really good programs, both ranked in the top 20 to start this season, to the SEC in Texas and Oklahoma, guess what ends up happening? You're going to have a lot of really good teams, and even the 3rd, 4th team in those leagues is going to be really good. And so now that these conferences are bloated, now that the Big Ten is at 18, the SEC is at 16, I'm willing to consider it more because, again, there is no Pac-12. Because, again, the Big 12 looks a lot different than it did a year ago. The conference is better. They're at 16 now. They were at 10 a year ago. They were at 10 a year ago, 12 this year. They're going to be at 16 next year. So how do you factor in Utah being a really good program, coming in and playing with TCU, Kansas State, whatever? I actually like this. And lastly, what I would say, I do like what Greg Sankey said about staying at 12. If you go back to what he said, I'm not convinced we need to reconsider the number of teams. And I've been clear that I would have been okay with an 8-team playoff. So basically what Greg Sankey said was, I was pushing for 8 because I know my conference champ every year is good enough. And heck, I know in an 8-team playoff, I'm probably going to still get 2 or 3 teams in and probably have 2 or 3 teams good enough to win it. But what he said was, while I pushed for 8, we all agreed on 12, and we don't need to go beyond 12. It's fine the way that it is, and I do agree with Greg Sankey on that. You get beyond 12, and especially if we remove automatic bids, you're now talking about the 5th, 6th best team in the SEC getting in. You're now talking about the 5th, 6th best Big Ten team getting in. And I'll just be blunt. What's even the point of playing the regular season at that point if 40% of the conference is going to get in? Just for fun, I went back and looked at who finished in the final the final poll last year around 15, 16, 17. You had Oregon, which lost 2 of its final 3 regular season games. Washington at home, Oregon State on the road. They finished 15th. So if we go to 16, Oregon's in. LSU finished 17th. Remember, that's a team that lost to A&M at the end of the regular season and then got destroyed by Georgia, understandably, in the SEC championship game. How about this? At number 19, you had South Carolina. At number 20, you had Texas, both finishing the regular season 8-4. So I'm with Sankey. I like 12. I think it's time to reconsider. Let's not go beyond 12, though. We don't need 8-4 South Carolina getting into a college football playoff or 9-4 LSU.